Well, thanks for coming today. We're really excited to hear what Dr. Rankin from the NIDDK has to say about applying for different grants as you transition throughout your career. And so I just started my faculty position in January, so I'm very eager to hear what she has to say, not only about the transition into early career, but also things that I can share with my trainees.
Thanks. It's a pleasure to be here. And what I thought I would do, and this is maybe a little bit different from the ask, but not too far afield. So don't have a hard check, Chris. Is not only describe what we have in terms of award mechanisms, grants, if you will, to support you during various career stages, but more importantly, what you should really consider when you're pulling together an application. Now, the emphasis is on how the career development awards are structured. Those are for postdocs, junior faculty, but the same kinds of points can also be applied to those who are applying, say, for a fellowship, or even, other outside NIH awards that happen to be offered by foundations. So this is a simplified, very simplified timeline, and mapped onto this timeline of career progression. Let me see if I can get my little pointer going here. Pointer options, laser pointer. And mapped along this career timeline are various award mechanisms applicable to that career stage. And what you should be aware of is that there are some programs that we only award to institutions. Think University of Wisconsin, University of Michigan, Ohio State University. And these are all below the line, as it were. So these awards are made to the university. The university has money to support trainees in that program, and they're the ones that would accept applications from potential trainees, vet them, and appoint them. So those programs start with programs we support for undergraduate students, primarily to come during the summer and have a summer research program. These are 25. And what you may be more familiar with are these institutional training awards, T32s. There's still a few active here in our division, as well as our new institutional network award, which I'm happy to elaborate on during Q&A, which functions somewhat similarly to the T32. Trainees are appointed to this TL1 phase, but we provide a bunch of other resources linked to those trainee appointments to provide for professional development and networking and support outreach activities. For those of us that are interested in urology and urologic diseases, we have a urology-specific institutional training for individuals a little bit more advanced than their early postdocs or graduate school. And that's the CURE program and the EuroEpi. So these are institutional career development programs, if you will. So people get appointed to the K-12, and they can often leverage that experience in the K-12 to get their own individual K subsequent to their appointment. Everything we offer for individuals, that is, you would apply as a principal investigator to these programs, are above the line. So if you are in graduate school, we have an F31. If you're in a dual degree program, MD, PhD, PharmD, PhD, we have an F30 to support the research years of that program. We have a transition award that we call the F99K00 for graduate students. We're using it currently to recruit graduate students who may not necessarily be doing research in our area, but have committed to a postdoc, which is supported by the K00 portion, to research in our KUH science. Once you've acquired your professional doctorate or your research doctorate, there are awards here for you. There's a fellowship award, usually used for early postdoctoral fellows. That's a fellowship award. The K01 and K99 are both career development awards for individuals who have PhDs, although the K99 is not restricted to those with PhDs. It tends to be the bulk of the applicants that support individuals in this postdoc space. as well as in junior faculty for the K01. We also have a career development transition award that we offer called the K99R00, very similar to the F99. You would get this as a postdoc. And after a brief mentored research experience, you could apply to transition to an R00, which requires you getting a tenure track position at an institution. And that would provide some additional resources for you to establish a research program. In the more traditional career development space, again, I've mentioned the K01, but we also have K mechanisms, career development mechanisms for individuals who are senior postdoc, junior faculty, that are also targeting individuals with a clinical background. So MDs, PharmDs, vets, we consider a veterinary degree, a clinical degree, to provide 5 years of mentored research time so that you can establish an independent research program and use that to launch into what we would hope to be a competitive R01. This little R03 program is adjunct to our career development awards. So if you have a K award with us, you can apply for this pilot and development award to provide some additional resources for your research program. And overall, all of this later PhD, postdoc, post-MD career stage is the loan repayment program. So if you have qualified educational debt, this is primarily directed to individuals who have clinical degrees. You can, it's not tied to having a K award. You can apply for a loan repayment independent of having any support from us. So as long as you have qualified educational debt and you are engaged in research and qualify for the individual programs, you can make application to the LRP. There's a separate website for the LRP. I'm happy to put it into the chat later. And there are several programs we participate in to provide up to $50,000 a year, and it's renewable, to relieve some of your debt. And basically that money goes directly to your debt holders as a contract. Overlaid with all of these mechanisms are programs that we use to support individuals from diverse backgrounds, individuals who are underrepresented in our scientific workforce. Again, some of these are targeting institutions through supplements, but there are individual programs. There are two I'll point out. We have an F31 that targets individuals from such backgrounds who are in graduate school. And there is also an R21 program administered outside of our division, but it is for individuals from such backgrounds conducting science in our overall NIDDK research mission. And happy to elaborate on the specifics of any of these, again, during Q&A. So this is like this huge buffet of programs. So what I thought I would do in the rest of the presentation is talk about things to consider when you're approaching this buffet and how to interact with staff here at NIDDK. The great thing about CAIRIBU is that my colleagues, Dr. Mullins, Dr. Nihalani, myself, and others in the division are wired in and accessible to you. So you should take advantage of that. So I sort of framed it in some of the top 10 questions that I get from prospective applicants when they come to me wanting to know what's going on in the award space for young investigators. So the biggest question, the most common question I get is, am I eligible for whatever? K01, K08, F31. So I have the old terminology FOA here. We now call them NOFOs, but the criteria are actually in the NOFO. Don't ask your mentor whether you're eligible or not, because 90% of the time they are incorrect. Go straight to the source, go straight to the notice of funding opportunity, and be aware that almost everything we offer, except the F99 or the K99, does require you to be a US citizen or have a green card. The other kind of qualifications described in the eligibility criteria speak to degrees, like you have to have a PhD or other professional doctorate, or some other criteria for you as a PI. But I get asked this all the time, but I'm not quite sure it's the right question. The right question is really which of all of these mechanisms I've described is most appropriate for me at my career stage, me at my level of experience in terms of research. And I just put some text here to highlight some of the things that are actually in the Notice of Funding Opportunity. All of these programs, and this is from a K, speak to you having skills and knowledge or resources. Again, I've mentioned the citizenship requirement. You can't be a PI or PD on an R01, that kind of makes sense, or other large research endeavors. If you've already done that, you're certainly not in need of a career development award. But lots of other things that you can compete for along the way, like these R03s or R21s, maintain eligibility for this career development award. And again, it speaks to degree. So you don't need to read all of it, but what I can tell you is missing here is title. Whatever your institution calls you, it doesn't matter. Because I get this all the time. I'm assistant research professor. Am I still eligible for the K99? Well, the K99 is targeted to postdocs, but it's not so much tied to what they call you at your institution. It's more about, are you in an independent position as faculty at your institution or not? So very important to go straight to the source, because there's a lot of urban myths out there about eligibility with respect to these career development awards and fellowship award programs. Is the work I'm doing a priority at NIDDK? And my favorite answer is, well, maybe. Please reach out to program staff way ahead of time to talk about your project, to make sure that what you're working on aligns with our research mission. Particularly in urology, we have a lot of overlap with other institutes, and sometimes it can be unclear as to what NIDK supports versus, say, what child health supports, what cancer supports, what allergy and infectious disease supports, think in the UTI space. There are some links here, but the best resource is yours truly, public servants, that can help create that sticky wicket. Now, when you reach out to me as to have this conversation, I'm always going to ask you for a draft specific aims page, so I get a sense of what you are and can where you are with your research program, and can provide you some solid advice as to whether we're interested or if it's best to find a different scientific home for the work. And another question, what K08 versus K23, a K01 versus a K99? Favorite answer is it depends. Now, the basic difference between this buffet of K award mechanisms is the who and the what. Who is the candidate, the principal investigator? That's you. Do you have an MD? Or do you have an other clinical degree and are licensed to practice here? Or are you a PhD or have other basic science degree? And and then the next question is, what kind of research are you interested in pursuing? Are you pursuing very basic foundational research, wet bench lab research, exclusive data science kind of project, epi project, or are you doing patient-oriented? Are you directly interacting with individual participants to collect their information and data for your project? Think qualitative studies, think clinical trials, or other observational studies that the candidate you're going to directly recruit into your study. So that's the biggest difference in terms of parsing out what career development award is most appropriate for you and your research. Again, talk to POs. If you don't take anything else away from this presentation, it's call us early, not too often, but early in your thinking about making application. Where will my application be reviewed? Once you're really deep in preparing this application, there is a question in the application that asks you to nominate or suggest a review committee. For anything in the fellowship or career development space, You don't have to worry about that question because all of those applications are reviewed in what we call an in-house review shop. NIDDK is responsible for the review of these applications. They don't go to the Center for Scientific Review, which is where all of the R01s are reviewed. Like your mentor's R01 going to a different place. The panels in NIDDK are just separated by divisional scientific interest. They have very uninformative names. I've listed them here, but you can find the rosters using this link and scrolling down to the Ds to find the latest rosters for the individuals that are reviewing. For urology, it's DDKD, Career Development Awards in Urology. For fellowship, it's DDKG. Again, totally uninformative. It doesn't tell you anything. But if you're interested in the expertise that's on these panels, check out this hyperlink.
So there is one question in the chat that says, what priority is given to investigators' request for scientific review committees?
Yeah, well, you don't have a choice. In the R01 world, you can suggest review panel, KUFD or PBKD or something from the Center of Scientific Review. And more often than not, CSR will honor that request. For Fs and Ks, everything that is assigned scientifically to the Division of Kidney, Urologic, and Hematologic Sciences, so a very big, broad swath of science, is going to DDKD. So the roster of DDKD is very, very big, very broad. So it's got nephrologists, it's got clinical urologists, people doing basic science in urology as well as hematology. So it's a very broad group of folks that encompasses all of those scientific areas needed to review career development applications in our research space. So you don't have to request anything because it's basically, once it's determined that the science you're proposing is within NIDDK's research interest, we will automatically assign based on whether it's doing urology or diabetes or digestive diseases. We'll put it in the right divisional committee for your science. I hope that helps. And same with fellowship. Okay. How many mentors do I need? I don't know. It can be very personal. You only have to have one. There's only one that's required for a career development application, but there's really no correct number. Your focus should be really on what they're going to provide for you. What are they going to bring to the table that's important for you to advance in your career, both research-wise and professional development-wise? And they should be willing to remain committed to you and interact regularly with you over the course of this entire award period. So that's usually a 5-year award period. It's okay to have mentors that are not at your institution. Again, anticipating reviewer concerns about how that's going to work. You just have to be very proactive on how you're going to interact with them, how they're going to interact with other members of your mentoring team. And the only thing that you should bear in mind is that your primary mentor, the one that you identify as primary, should have a demonstrated track record and should have, a source of support for you. Doesn't necessarily have to be an NIH R01, but they have to come to the table with research resources to support your research project, because a K award will not do that. You only get a limited amount of money for direct research support. Most of the money in a K award is for you, for your salary support. So your mentor or your institution should come to the table with sufficient resources to ensure that the project can get done.
So I have a question about that. If you're like an early stage investigator and you want to have a primary mentor that's more clinical to help you make your research more clinical or translational, can your institution then write you kind of a letter of support saying like they provided a startup package or something like that, so the financial aspect of it is covered?
Yes, that's an excellent strategy. Part of the application for a career development award includes an institutional commitment letter, usually written by a department chair or dean, that speaks to exactly that. And for clinicians, it has to be explicit about protected time so that they can be freed from clinical responsibilities. But if there are additional resources they're providing for you, space, personnel support sometimes, or a startup, they don't have to put out a dollar amount. But if they're providing some financial resources for you, absolutely include that in the letter of institutional commitment, so that the reviewers have the sense that the institution's behind you, got your back. And another thing to consider in the institutional commitment letter is also often reviewers look at timeline to promotion, right? If you're coming in as a research instructor or a postdoctoral fellow, what is their commitment to you in terms of moving you along the professional pathway at your institution?
So in those cases, it would be okay to have a primary mentor who maybe doesn't have funding themselves, as long as you have in your package that institutional support.
Yeah, you can. And then your primary mentor should really be proactive and speak to that in their mentor statement and say, hey, you know, I appreciate that I don't have, say, current NIH funding or other robust sources of support at the moment. However, Dean Smith or Department Chair Young in their institutional commitment letter is speaking to the research resources that are available to this candidate.
Thank you.
Do I need courses in the career development plan? Yeah, maybe, possibly. So the way I like to frame my advice in terms of people writing a career development plan is going about it with this question that I have here on the slide. Why can't you submit that competitive R01 today? What are you missing? What is preventing you from being a competitive R01 investigator? And come up with that list. You can do it in collaboration with your mentoring team. And from that list of, quote, deficiencies, weaknesses, gaps, is a starting point for you to design activities to address those gaps. So if some of that gap is clearly, well, I don't know anything about urothelium, right? Or clinical aspects of urology, that can be satisfied with a didactic course or some sort of shadowing program, whatever. So it's really not required to have didactics in your career development plan, but most people do to some level. Some people get a full master's degree in their career development plan as outlined. Others just have a smattering of courses here and there to fill in some technical gaps in their knowledge. So there are lots of ways to address knowledge gaps. So be creative, and I'm going to get to that in a minute. I'm going to transition here to some of the issues I see that people stumble on when they go through peer review in the career development award space. And I've just touched on one of these, and that is what I call vanilla career development plans. Approach these plans with as much thought as you do your research project. Everybody's head is in the research space. They're spending a lot of time on specific approach, pitfalls. That's fantastic. You need to spend just as much thought on the career development space, because a fantastic research plan with a vanilla career development plan is not going to put you in a competitive range for funding. And in approaching this as a plan that will be very tailored to you is appropriate. You want to make sure that you clearly told the reviewers, this is where I need help. These are the activities that I'm putting in my career development plan that are going to help me address those gaps. And my mentoring team, here they are, describe them, and their roles are going to make sure that I hit all of these milestones that I've outlined. And that leads right into the next section, lack of those milestones in some sort of accountability plan in a career development plan. What are the expectations for your progress? How are the mentors going to evaluate you? That's much more important to include in a CDP than their palmares, right? Because bio sketches are going to be provided for your mentors. So the reviewers know who they are and what their expertise is. What they really see in a career development plan is what's their approach for you in terms of evaluation and mitigation if you should stumble, because stuff happens. Things are going to get missed in terms of milestones, and how are they going to help you navigate those little minefields or big minefields, COVID. Another common issue, so to speak, is a very big research plan that's quite too much for what is essentially a 5-year research project. And to bear in mind that this is only one first step in what we hope to be a very long research career for you. And it's laying that foundation. So be very critical about the scope of work that you're proposing, and focus, focus, focus. Getting to the research plan again, another thing I see very commonly, particularly in new investigator kinds of applications like these career development awards, is a focus on the methodology or the resource over the question. So the question needs to drive the work, not, you know, single cell RNA-seq technology or the latest and greatest in the world. You really do need to determine whether that cool approach is the best approach to address your question, or if that particular cohort that you have ready access to is the best cohort to address your question. And when you're writing the specific aims and the significance question, just because I see a lot of justifications about, well, we just don't know this, so this is why we're going to study it. But just because something is unknown doesn't make it important. What are the implications of knowing? If you learn about, if you fill in that knowledge gap, how is that going to improve our understanding of a physiological process that's important in urology? Or how is it going to move the needle in terms of patient diagnostics or therapeutics? Lack of pitfall, alternatives in your research plan. Stuff, as I said, stuff happens. So having a well-reasoned approach is great, but things will go wrong. Your antibodies may not work the way you want them to, or your hypothesis, God forbid, may not be supported with the data you acquire. How are you going to address not only those technical pitfalls, but the conceptual ones when you find you're not getting data that's supportive of your research question? You don't have to flesh this out in any great detail, but there needs to be a plan B to give the reviewers really thought carefully about the problem and what can go wrong. And you have a path to address an alternative approach. Lastly, just some advice. I say no, FOA, my own advice is update my slides more. Read the notice of funding opportunity announcement. Again, we went through eligibility criteria. It is there. Again, asking your mentors may not get you the right answer. And please do use the correct one, because there are several flavors of each of these, one for clinical trials, one for no clinical trials, one for basic experimental. It can be very confusing. Program officers can be very helpful. Someone like me or my colleagues can help you navigate that. Most importantly, everyone focuses when they read the notice of funding opportunity on how to submit the application. You should also read, and you should read it first, the section 5, review information. That is the place in the notice of funding opportunity where we put questions for reviewers that we want them to use to assess the application. And you absolutely want to make sure you hit those points so that the reviewers have something to review. So you know what they are going to be focused on when they review the application. which gets to those reviewers. Those reviewers are your audience. The rosters for the DDKD and DDKG subcommittees I provided for you in the slide deck, which has been sent to CAIRIBU and will be circulated. So make sure you understand the who they are and write accordingly. The secondary audience is the funding institute, NIDDK, us guys. But your biggest free energy barrier to getting an award is going to be that initial peer review. So that means make no assumptions. Those aims, that proposal really does need to make sense to individuals outside of your immediate area of expertise, which is why I ask or advise folks, when you've developed a proposal, make sure you circulate it widely to individuals that are outside your immediate circle, so you can get that feedback from them, because they are more reflective of peer review than your immediate mentors. And again, call us. Call program office. I'm the primary contact for career development awards in urology. My colleague, Dr. Merrick Bilkin, is the primary contact for fellowship. And do this early with that draft specific aims. Draft, keyword draft. It doesn't have to be pristine. It doesn't have to have gone through your mentor committee 10 times. It's fine. I'm not sharing it with anybody. I just want to get a sense of your research project to help you with understanding what our interests are. And finally, don't give up. Be persistent. It's not frequently that people hit, as it were, on their first application, but the critiques you get back from that peer review, particularly in these committees, they're the best summary statements you're ever going to see, because those reviewers really do want to help you and provide you with constructive feedback on your proposal if it doesn't get a priority score that we can support from the get-go. And once you have that feedback, talk to me, talk to your assigned program officer about how to move forward with those critiques. And that is all I have. And I'm happy to open it up and answer questions.